Everyone, welcome back. Shane Combs alongside my brother Matt. This is Expanding the Zone, Season 7. If we've counted them up correctly, this is episode 72. And thank you always to Dr. Chris Good Health Chiropractic Center. Appreciate all his support throughout the YouTube channel. If you're listening to us on your podcast app, make sure you check us out over on YouTube, SBC Sports Zone. Or again, if you're on YouTube with us, make sure you get us on your podcast app so you can take us with you everywhere you go. In the car and out exercising, whatever it is you're doing. Appreciate you giving us some time. If you're new to the show, welcome. It's kind of like a leadership coaching type podcast where we take a lot of what's going on in the world of sports and we try to apply it just to some real life situations. And Matt, as we get going into the season 7, I guess. This time of year, it makes sense to take a look at the month of June. If I was going to title the show, I might call it a not so summer break. It's been a topic that it's come up quite a bit over the years, and there's been some change in dynamics to high school sports that I think are going to impact June a little bit more. And I think it has parents and athletes making some comments, coaches kind of being made aware of some things in the middle, and then the OHSAA is looking at some other states and so forth to go. And we'll get into all that. But I guess as I welcome you to the show, where I would love to start is maybe take us back to your playing days, if you can remember back that far, and uh, and tell us a little bit about through the 90s as you finished up your playing career, went off to college to play, and then started to get into to your young coaching. What did the month of June look like from a high school sports perspective back in the 90s?
Yeah, when I was coming up through, um, really the off season just consisted of open gyms, um, you know, some weightlifting, and even that back then for basketball at least was pretty much on your own. That really hadn't become a thing where basketball was all in on the weightlifting yet. But it was open gyms. In fact, you had to, so much of it, and we've talked about this before, Shane, was unstructured play. You know, it was go down to City Park and play. We had some great pickup games down at City Park. Um, and or your own open gyms or going to other people's open gyms. I mean, that happened all the time. I'd Coach Shoemaker used to run really good open gyms out of Paint Valley back in the day, and we'd go out there and play. And we had open gyms at Uniota with Coach Lovely, and we went to Southeastern some, their open gyms, and because you were looking for a place to play, and you had to kind of take it upon yourself to go do it. So you were really kind of operating on your own schedule. Um, so it was unstructured. It was, you could put the work in, but it wasn't necessarily, like it is today, where the coaches are sort of putting that schedule together for you. In fact, too, and I think right about the time, Shane, maybe you were a junior or senior in high school. So now we're 94, 95 versus 91, 92 for me, is when the OHSA started to allow you to play with your team in the summer. I think that's where things really started to change, in my opinion, is when we allowed the 10 coaching days where you could play as a group. I'm just talking basketball here, obviously, but they started doing that for every sport, and when things started to change. So I think when early 90s or beyond or before, it was kind of unstructured, just some open gym type workouts, things like that.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, all the way down to remember the days of Gus Macker, you'd only play with like a teammate, and a lot of
Yeah, you can
times
only have two,
yeah,
right?
you join a couple guys from another school or so forth. I agree with you when it changed over to allowing the concept that opened the window up for teams to start playing together, for teams to start traveling together. You used the word 10 days. I remember that definition became really so new that it became really difficult to understand for a lot of people. What was technically a day, in terms of one of those 10 days, and you go at that point. I do feel like it started to change the landscape of high school sports from this sense. When we were growing up, I remember, you help me here a little bit and correct me if I'm wrong, but we even had a number of days you were supposed to go to individual camp, right? Was it 15? You couldn't, like, the individual couldn't go out and go to more than that. It seemed like you
Yeah.
had to count your, so you had your individual, usually had your high school camp that your school was running. I know, like, we would a lot of times go down to OU basketball camp, or a lot of it. Rio Grande had some popular basketball camps. Um, am I making that up? It seems like there was something individually you did have to count there a little bit, but you know,
Yeah,
seemed like it was 15.
I can't remember exactly. There was something like that, I think, Shane. It's interesting you bring that up because I totally forgotten about that. I do think there was something like that back in the day. I do know for sure about, when you did go to camp. I can remember one year when you were in high school, you guys went to a camp together, several of you from the same team. And I did the same thing. We'd go to, I think it was Blue Chip basketball camp down in Kentucky or whatever. And they had to know how many were coming from Uniota so we could all be on different teams at that camp, because you could only have two on each team, right? Like you're talking about. I do think there was something with the individual camp days too back then. So there did seem to be a little bit more of I don't know. I mean, there's always been a certain level of trying to police the summer off season, right, or the activities in the summer. Those guidelines have just changed over the years, which I know we're going to discuss tonight a little bit.
Well, and I think the theme to all of it was, as you went through, you used the term unstructured play. I think the ball was really in the court of the players, and I think the players who found those opportunities to play, the way to get better at your craft, the way to get better individually, the way to get better collectively. I think that's really what separated a lot of teams in that area. And I think as they started to make these changes, I do think it allowed the coach to put his or her hands on the program a little bit more, and start to utilize the ability in June. The other thing I look back on is, it was more common back when I first started teaching. Now we're starting to change over into the early 2000s, for school to go a week, maybe even a week and a half into June. So a lot of times when we talked about this, spring sports would be finishing up. School summer break may not start until June 7th, June 8th. As late as that, and I think that impacted a little bit. So all of these dynamics start to play together in terms of how June, as high school started to take over, and here's my perspective, Matt. Now you would be into your coaching career as I say this. So as I say this, you kind of tell me agree, disagree, maybe fill in some of the blanks I'm missing. My interpretation, as high school sports started to take over June a little bit, that was basically the downhill slide of where your Gus Mackers started to fall, your individual camps started to fall, your Legion baseball started to fall. Um, AAU and club volleyball wasn't quite what it was then. It was starting, especially club volleyball was really starting to take over. AAU was still a little bit more of a unique opportunity. Um, it was starting to grow. Um, and I look at it that way. Probably in the early 2000s is where I started to see more high school sports start to take over June, and a little bit less individual opportunity. Colleges across Ohio and really across the country started to figure out, especially here in Ohio, because of the rules of, wait a minute, our OU or our Rio individual camps may not be as popular as they've been for 20, 25 years. We're going to have to change over to some team shootouts. We're going to have to go over to some team camps. Is that kind of fair in terms of how the domino effect started to even put some pressures on the colleges to change the way they went about offering opportunities to get better in the summer?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when that started, you really started to see the whole team camp idea, um, where you would go as a group for three, 2, 3, 4 days to a college or whatever to play. The you would it started the shootout idea where you would go for one day and play all day long at a college or whatever. I think your individual camps at that point became more elementary school focused. You know what I mean? Elementary and junior high, because I think like Rio still has their individual camp, but I can't imagine that they're getting high school kids at that. I haven't looked, but it's probably, younger kids and all that. Um, yeah, it definitely because at the end of the day, those colleges were going to evolve. I mean, those camps are fundraisers for them. Okay, make no mistake about it. That's one of their big money makers in the off season when they run those camps, and um, or just an opportunity at small colleges. I think opportunity for coaches to supplement their salaries and run these camps because you can do that at the college level. So they were going to adjust. If they couldn't get the individuals there, they were going to try to go to the team route. So yeah, definitely.
So now, as I continue on, I guess I look at it as okay. So you're playing a lot more team stuff, and there was a lot of benefit to that. Let's face it, you got a chance to get your guys together in the summer and play together and do some things, and it was is a little bit more structured play to kind of play off of what you said earlier. And you're starting to go to some team camps, some shootouts. You're having some things at your school. Um, but I think there's some start of some slippage in terms of individual development and some of those things because again now all of a sudden maybe you're not putting the ball in your hand just in the one-on-one or the individual workout as we call them now setting or just out by yourself putting those times in. I think some of that stuff started to slip, and as you go forward, you know schools started to let out a little earlier. So as I got about halfway through my career, with state testing and so forth here in Ohio, what's happened to the calendar? Most schools, we have the Ross County Fair that's pretty standard early August, so a lot of times we're not going to touch that week. So schools started going back as early as they possibly could. Remember, we didn't used to go back till late August. Now we try to sneak it into the middle of August the best we can with the Ross County Fair. And as a result, most schools are really trying to get out before the end of May. By Memorial Day. So now June has opened up a little bit more in that aspect, and all sports started to view this as the off season. And I think, football and basketball started competing, volleyball started competing for more time, and the kids started getting pulled in a lot of different directions there. A lot of that's probably depending on your school and what is a little bit bigger, a little bit more. I don't know the word. Maybe successful, popular, whatever word you want to use, and that's kind of where the schedule starts to go back and forth. Now we arrive at a point then, Matt, as we get more into the modern day. June had really opened up wide, and then this past spring, I noticed a change in dynamic. And I think probably a lot of it comes from the seven divisions because what was happening is the football playoffs stretched out a little bit and it started to bump some of the things back. And you can speak as a coach and an AD here, but it bumped the winter back a little bit. And then it bumped the spring sports back a little bit. And it seemed like baseball and track went a lot deeper into the end of May and early June as compared. Like I know we were just playing some all-star games in the middle of June, almost the third week of June, and that had to impact a little bit of some of the June schedule for say yourself as a basketball coach or some of those things. Is that am I making that up or was this particular year different in some way?
No, I think there is some truth to that, Shane. I think that for whatever reason, June is the month in the off season that's really taken the hit. And I think a lot of those things you mentioned come into play, obviously. Um, it's one of these things where with this, and I don't know if it's the seven division the first year with that and baseball, softball. I don't know exactly. There's a lot that goes into those tournament schedules when the districts and the OHSA puts these together. But like things definitely bled in to June. We had a baseball team at Uniota that made a great tournament run, and that's always awesome and cool. And those things don't happen every year. This year, our baseball season didn't end until like June 13th. But then when you get even teams that maybe made the districts or whatever first week of June, and then like you say, the All Star games um, still going on. I think there was one. Um, we're recording this on, I don't even know what the day is, the
26th.
26th or so. Yeah. um, uh, and I think there was one yesterday. There was a workout or an all-star game or like um, a showcase of some kind that again, when you've got basketball, you got football, doing workouts, and you still have kids playing in all-star games, and so all these sports are sort of like overlapping right now. I think it's the June is probably the month, Shane, wouldn't you agree, that probably where most of your issues come in terms of pulling kids in a lot of different directions. By the time July rolls around, things start to get a little more focused in on their upcoming fall sports. Um, at least my experience, basketball usually drops off a little bit in July. Kids start to get ready for either volleyball, soccer, football, or whatnot at that point. But yeah, June has really become an issue for sure.
Well, I think it is interesting, and that's why we've opened the show the way we have. Is we're just trying to paint a picture of June in terms of all the different things. Because I think the other thing that I get feedback from people is, 4-H has suffered, church camps have suffered, all of these different things that you still want your kids to be involved in, family vacations. As you get into some of your older kids now, jobs. I mean, a lot of kids are working more probably than when they did when we were growing up. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe it just feels that way a little bit. In terms, I'm talking when you're in the high school age, and all of those things kind of collide to make for kind of a confusing schedule and so forth. So I guess we throw all that out here to bring up this idea of what is the best way to manage this, or what's the responsibility of the state, what's the responsibility of our schools, our administration, coaches, what's the responsibility of the parents, what's the responsibility of the athletes, and I guess um, one of the big headlines that caught my attention was something that Kentucky did. Now, if I understand this dead period that Kentucky's added in, it's a newer dead period that runs from like June 25th to about July 9th. So what it does is it takes a segment of the summer where it just says absolutely no contact. And it was interesting in some of the reading where they were even breaking it down all the way to the inability to talk to the kids, to reach out to them, to have formal or informal meetings. And I won't go into all the weeds here, Matt, but what was interesting about it is people be like, man, why are they so specific or whatever? Because I think, again, every time something comes out, people are always looking for a loophole or a way to maneuver around or to still kind of get together and still try to do some different things. And they kind of stepped out and go. But now, as I started to talk to you, and I've reached out to two or three other ads even at local schools, this is kind of something that even schools have started to consider in some way in their own home type of rule book, for lack of a better term. Can you comment on that a little bit in terms of your take on Kentucky and how much maybe this has been discussed in Ohio?
Yeah, I don't know how much it's been discussed at like the state level, Shane. Interestingly enough, about maybe 2 weeks ago or so, I was running our junior high basketball league that we have down at Uniota, and I was just kind of in a informal conversation with another head varsity coach, and he had mentioned that he may not be able to be there, the last week because it's going to be what he called their dead week. Um, and I had honestly never heard of anything like this in the summer. I mean, obviously the OHSA has no contact periods for different sports. They've always had those. 30 days after your season, for instance, in basketball, and the month of August, pretty much for like basketball. But like, um, I never really heard of this in the summer, so I asked. I was like, "What are you talking about? What?" And his particular school has a week where they shut everything down pretty much just from a sports level. Like, hey, coaches, on this particular week, we're not going to have anything. We're not going to have workouts. We're not going to have, and the idea behind it is to give, parents and families a week well in advance that they can schedule vacations. They can, um, take advantage of just however they want to use that time or whatever. Um, and that was kind of the first I heard of it. And to be really honest, we've had some discussion, just right now, just kind of preliminary discussions on, is this something we should look at? Or because I started checking around, and believe it or not, there were more schools than you think that do this type of thing. Um, and we can get into the pros and cons of that, Shane, and here in a little bit, because there's actually some more benefit to that than just for parents and families. There's actually some school benefits for that too, I think. But to answer your question on the state level, I have not heard personally that this has been a discussion with the OHSAA. You know, my one concern about it being a state rule is that, and this has always been sort of my issue, with the OHSA, not really with the OHSA, but anytime the OHSA comes up with guidelines or rules, I think if you're going to come up with guidelines or rules, you have to be able to enforce them. All right. And I think there are times where some of the OHSA rules that we have, especially with the off season. Okay, you mentioned earlier, Shane, when we were talking, right, 10 days, the 10-day rule. Well, who enforces that rule? Because I think you were sort of tongue in cheek there at the beginning of the show talking about how,
Yeah.
well, like the 10-day thing became kind of interpreted differently. Years ago, I was at a scrimmage at a school. I won't name the school and I won't name the coach, obviously, because this is a Hall of Fame level coach. This guy was a great coach. And we were there at his place for a scrimmage, and he was sitting in the top row. And I was like, hey man, what are you doing? He's like, he goes, I'm going to let my freshman coach tonight because I don't want it to count against our days. Well, that's not the rule. It counts against your days, no matter who's. You look up that rule. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you got a volunteer coaching. If your kids are playing together, that's one of the 10 days. So my point to all that is, as soon as the OHSA put that in, that's got to be enforced, and it's unenforceable. The OHSA doesn't have enough manpower to go around and peek into your gymnasiums and send people out to monitor and to observe, and you know so you start putting these rules in place. My thing to the Kentucky High School Athletic Association would be, how are you going to enforce this? Because what the OHSA would tell you on almost all of their rules, Shane, and all their bylaws is, it is the school's responsibility to enforce. Like, the member school is responsible for the enforcement of rules. It's the same thing on transfer rules a lot of the times, right? It's the member school's responsibility to enforce the rule. And if that's the case, then you're right back to square one, where it comes back to the school having to make sure that their coaches aren't doing more than 10 days. So my point to all that is, with this dead period in Kentucky from whatever you said it was, the end of June to,
June 25th to July 9th.
right,
It's no contact in person, no practices, workout, team meetings, no use of facilities, no fundraising, no team camps, no open gyms. Athletes can't even use the school facilities to do even a student led activity.
right,
It says, we'll see you in July 10th. Enjoy your time off.
right. So, and again, fine and dandy, right? But who is enforcing that? Who is enforcing that from the KHSAA or whatever, right?
Mhm.
It's, my guess is nobody, because I mean, it's impossible to enforce. I mean, you don't have the ability to go out to every school. So that would be my only concern, Shane, with it being a state-led thing. I think ultimately it probably has to come back to being a school decision.
And when you say school decision, a lot of times it's you put that out there. Um, and I do think, gosh, I don't want to sound like a cop out here as a coach, but a lot of times as a coach, it does give the coach a little bit of policy to stand on,
Mhm.
if that makes sense to you. Because a lot of times, from a coach's perspective, or even some of your hardcore parents or your athletes, we want to work. We want to do this. It's not a bad thing, right? We want to put some time in. We want to go work out. We want to go to this. We would like to get better. We want, and that all sounds great. But if in order to do this, a lot of the feedback I get is, man, if they're doing it over there and they're taking advantage of 2 more weeks of this or 2 more weeks of this, I feel like we're supposed to. I guess that's where sometimes if it comes from the state level or comes from the school administration, if you look at it from a coaching perspective, Matt, do you feel like that does take a little bit of pressure off of you if it's a procedure that's supposed to be followed in terms of instead of you, don't you think it'd be very difficult for a coach just to say, hey, we're not doing anything for the next 3 weeks or whatever, especially if it's in the heart of a time that's normally where a lot of basketball programs are getting better.
Yeah, there's power in numbers, right? I mean, and that's I think probably why the Kentucky High School Athletic Association went this route. Does it make it easier? Sure, it does. Would it make it easier for Uniota or Paint Valley to have a no contact period in the summer if everybody had to do it? Sure, because that way, you know, you're not open to any criticism or whatever if your school decides to do it. Or you even took it another level down to the individual coach, right? If the individual coach wants to shut it down. Because on social media, Shayne, you'd put a post out and then a couple other people would actually somebody I know at Uniota had just today put a post out about the same exact thing about this thing in Kentucky, and I got to be honest with you, okay, and I'm not trying to sound, um, critical here. Maybe I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit. I don't know. A lot of the parents would come back on these responses. A lot of parents, people in general, oh yeah, it's a great idea. We need more of that. We're asking kids to do too much. And I understand that. I think there's some truth to that, but it's a little bit funny to me that some of the same people who make those comments are probably people that would be upset with the coach if the coach didn't provide some level of off-season workout and opportunity. You understand what I mean? Like if how long would a coach last at a school who really values their football program or their basketball program if they cut their workouts by 50%? You know what I mean? If hey, um, you know, and I don't want to put any one school on the spot, but hey, this school has a great football tradition and they're wanting to win a league championship, but we're going to work out half the time that this school up the road works out. Then all of a sudden, a lot of the same parents who are calling for, this kind of thing would be like, whoa, our coach isn't putting in much of an effort this off season.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, what's he doing? Is he at the beach? Is he at the, he's not, so there's a fine line there because there are kids that want to work. There are kids that maybe only play that sport, so it doesn't affect them the same. They want to be like I've got kids that only play basketball. I've got a couple kids who are gym rats. They want to be in there all the time. But then I've got kids who play three sports. So, so where do you draw that line where you're trying to provide opportunities for your team to get better and play a little bit? Because I do at times feel like, man, we push these kids pretty hard. Man, we're asking them to do a lot. But a lot of that is all these sports have bled into each other, and you're trying to provide some opportunities for your kids to get better and play as a team so that you can say, hey, we did put in some work in the off season. But you're also trying to juggle that versus everybody else trying to do the same thing as a coach, and all of a sudden you're asking your kids to be in there all the time. So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, but but yeah, I mean, I think that I personally think, Shayne, circling back to what you said, is I think the ultimate responsibility, if you're going to have a no contact period, I think it's best if that's at the school level.
Well, it's interesting when you start to go down through some of the different comments here because you get some people that reference the fair and some of the different things they have going on in the summer. Terry Hell, who we know from the Benton County area, referenced some things that they do in West Virginia with a lot of days, and he talks about how you start competing for athletes, against the different sports as you because you're starting to lessen the calendar a little bit. Someone from the Columbus area, because they've done this more. If I read between the lines, probably some of the different schools, as you said, have incorporated this, and some of the parents have gotten to the point where they think they thought it was a state thing. Um, Sometimes, like you said, it's more of a school thing. I know you and I know Okie Martin really well. Oak from the Kentucky area talks about the different things that they do down there, and the legendary longtime coach. Um, Matt Paxton, who was at the high school level and college level, he made some interesting comments, and he talked about in their coaching board a lot of times that the AAU and travel and club don't have the same standards, so it puts a little bit more emphasis on the total child. Now you start to get a little bit more money, a little bit more kids, and I guess what intrigued me about that particular thing, and again, I appreciate all the people who commented on here. We got local athletic directors, local coaches of all kinds of sports. But I wanted to kind of take a look there with Coach Paxton, what he was saying. It is interesting, Matt, that it puts a lot more back onto the parent and to the kid. And I guess at that point they can do whatever they want. But I think it does push more to the AP preps of the world, to the individual coaching of the world, to the seeking that place somewhere else, the AAU, the club circuits, all of these different things. I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm not here to say it is. What it has been my experience over the years that if all of a sudden, and I'm not picking on AP Prep because they're incredible. What they've done for some of
Right.
our local youth has been awesome. I think kids could be doing a lot worse things than working out. Um, the but my point is sometimes if AP Prep tells you to be here Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 7 a.m., like that's awesome discipline and that's incredible for the kid or whatever. But if a coach would dare say, okay, Monday, Wednesday, Friday this week we have 7 a.m. weightlifting, as well as I do, there'd be some people like, whoa, wait, that's a little. It's
Yeah.
June, like we need more
Yeah.
time off. You get what I'm saying there?
Mhm.
I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to be contradictory. I'm just trying to paint a picture of what goes into these type of decisions. You can talk there as an AD, coach, parent, all of them combined if you want, but don't you think there can sometimes be a double standard in terms of how people go? Because I think you made the comment earlier. I don't want to speak for you. There's a lot of parents that they want their kid to put a lot of time into sports. And if this particular thing became 2 weeks, yes, some of it would be family vacation, but a lot of it might be two more AAU tournaments over the weekend.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'll say up front, Shane, that ultimately I think there's some value to looking at some time off in the summer. I really do. But again, maybe playing devil's advocate or looking at the other side of this a little bit. The thing that kind of bothers me some, and I think this is probably as a school administrator too, the thing that really kind of gets on my nerves at times is when there's this feeling that, the public school should take responsibility for everything, right? Should take responsibility for how you as a family manage your time, and how you know much free time or off time in the summer a kid gets to be a kid, right? Or a family gets to do family things. Because like one of the one of the posts that went out there was from somebody at Uniota on social media about this, and of course, I know a lot of the people who are responding, and almost all of them, a high percentage of them, who were saying, "Oh yeah, this would be a great idea. This would be a great idea." Have kids who play club volleyball, have kids who play club soccer, have kids who play summer baseball, have kids who play AAU basketball. You know what I mean? And my question to them would be, okay, so during this off time that you're asking the schools to do, are are you going to be, like you said, are you going to be taking them to club volleyball that week, club soccer that week, AAU basketball that week, baseball that? Because then it's not really off time. Like I guess my question would be, why is it only the school's responsibility to help provide off time? But it's okay to be going. I mean, some of the people that I know, listen, some of the people that I know, they're playing club volleyball during softball. They're playing AAU basketball during baseball. You know what I'm saying? They're mixing in a weekend basketball tournament during baseball season. A lot of times, especially like at junior high level. Um, you know, like when do we start looking at that? When do we start looking at that part of the schedule and saying there needs to be some time off from that too? You know what I mean? Why is it just the school's responsibility, I guess, Shane? It's kind of like I I would use the comparison to like when when a kid is having some social issues at school, right? The word bullying gets thrown around a lot, and quite frankly, it gets you know used at times where that's not really what's going on. If you know the definition of that word, but I don't want to get into all that. But what I'm saying is, as a principal, you'll get a call that says, "Well, why aren't you guys doing more?" And we'll ask, well, how did this all start? Well, they were on Snapchat last night at the house and it was going back and forth. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So as a parent, do you have any responsibility for monitoring your kids' social media use? You see what I'm saying? So my comparison is here. Does the school has some responsibility for summer athletics and how much yes. But don't you think, Shane, that parents and families have some responsibility of are we also doing too much on this other side that's keeping our kid? Yeah, because I've had basketball players this spring, um, of this June, as we're trying to get our some of our scrimmages in. And as a basketball coach, I don't even use all 13 of our days. They allow 13 days now, by the way. So there's the OHSA's even allowing more, not less. We're talking about Kentucky. The OHSA is allowing more time. But so I don't even use my 13 days, Shane. But I've had plenty of athletes this year miss basketball stuff. I've got a club soccer workout tonight, or I've got a baseball all-star game tonight. I've got a summer baseball game tonight, right? So they're missing our stuff for for the stuff that their parents are paying for them to do, right? So why is that okay, but yet it's not okay for the coach? You see, kind of like what you were saying with the comparison there, the 7 a.m. workouts. At what point do parents and families have to take some responsibility?
The other thing that hit me, Matt, and I promise for our long time listeners, I promise here, I'm not getting ready to go on my little league soapbox. Okay, I'm not doing that. But I do want to throw this out there is another huge difference from when we were growing up and we started coaching. So I wouldn't even say going back to when we were growing up. I know it's a long time ago. I'm talking 20 years ago compared to now. The opportunities for the junior high or even the fifth, sixth grade age kid in June away from opportunities to play. Like I see junior high leagues now where a junior high basketball player may be offered 2 to 3 nights a week to like play, not just come to open gym or to do whatever, like actually play like in a summer league throughout June. To me, that's a lot different. So now what's happened is a generation ago, where this really might have only been a 3, 4 year window of your kid's life, is now a little bit more of a 7, 8, 9, 10 year window. And if you have 2 or 3 kids and that overlaps, sometimes I think it overwhelms the adults and families in that way. Do you think we're on to something there too? That a huge difference is it used to just be, well, when my kid was going into like their sophomore year, their junior year, and their senior year. No. Now this is from the time your kid's like in the fourth, fifth grade. They literally may have 8, 9, 10 different things on the calendar that they're expected to come to at the school for football and then for basketball. So I do think the little league movement and how we've started things so much younger now has added to this. That's something I didn't even have in my notes that as you were talking there kind of. Do you think that's fair? That's added to the frustration. I don't even know if frustration is the right word, just to the chaos of families in their lives.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I think that, having a son who is now in junior high, who came up through like little league baseball, and we were my son never played any level of like travel stuff. Like we didn't play travel baseball. Last year was his first year of spring AAU basketball. He decided to play. It was his first time. I've known parents who have done that since the third and fourth grade, right? And I know when he played AAU basketball this past spring, and he played baseball at the same time. It was a hectic spring, and I really sat down with him one on one, and I said, listen, if this ever gets to be too much, if you're not having fun, then we're backing off. You know what I'm saying? We're stepping away from that. But my point to this is, and I even said this to my wife, I said, this has been kind of fun for us to go watch him play this spring because it's our first year ever doing it. But there were times where we're like, "Whew, we got a tournament again this weekend, man." It'd kind of be nice not to do anything this weekend, but it was fun because we've never done. But can you imagine had we done that since the third grade, third, fourth, fifth,
Yeah.
sixth? By that point, I think we would have had a different attitude about it. We would have been like, man, this kind of stinks. We got to do this again. But because our first experience with it was as our son was going into the eighth grade, it was fresh and new and okay for us. But I know parents have been doing it for years. And like you said, at that point, by the time they get to high school, you're almost, as a parent, we talk about burnout. The
Yeah.
parents are almost burned out
Well,
a little
no,
bit.
and that's why I say so. A high school coach that's had nothing to do with the last
Right.
6, 7 years,
They
and again,
catch
there's
the
nothing
brunt
wrong
of
with
it.
it. All of a sudden, they're like, "Here's another person in front of me, like making them do that now or
Mhm.
whatever." Yeah,
Yeah, and I
that's
and I
interesting.
think, yeah, no doubt about it. I think again, that's where I think, and this is a whole different podcast about,
Sure,
club AAU versus your school sports, but I think school sports have gotten a bad rap and have taken a hit sometimes almost a, in large part because parents are burned out and tired from the AAU and club and all that kind of thing. They want
sure.
some time off. So again, that was my whole point, right? Why is it always the public school's responsibility to provide this? Like, just playing devil's advocate, because parents want some time off, they want to be able to catch their breath, but they're not asking their AAU or club teams to give them that time off to catch their breath. They're asking the public schools to give them that time off. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
That's my only issue with this. Now, and again, in full transparency, I personally lean toward this as a good idea. I really do. But I just think, let's be fair as we discuss this, because as I see some of the comments on social media, that's what some of those are like, well, wait a minute here. That's a little unfair toward public schools. You want to act like, you know, some of the criticisms of coaches, they say this
Right.
is non-mandatory, but it really is mandatory. Well, it's not mandatory because, like, if a kid comes into the season for me in basketball next year and he didn't show up all summer, right? And because of that, some other kids pass him up and play more than him. The criticism might be, well, see, it's mandatory. Well, no, it's not mandatory. You're on the team. If it was mandatory, you'd be cut. You know what I'm saying? Like, so
Hmm.
it's not mandatory. The
And if
fact
that
that,
player comes back and is still better, there's a
and is
good
he
chance he's still
better
going
and
to
he earns his
play.
spot? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, a lot of times, if you don't show up all summer long and some other kid shows up all summer long, that kid's probably going to be better than you. That's just real life. And that's real life back, Shane, when I was in high school. You said earlier, how did it go? Well, yeah, it was unstructured, right? We went to City Park, we went to Poland Park, we went to open gyms, we went wherever to play. But guess what? The kids that showed up to the park and the kids that showed up to open gym, they were probably better come the season. It just wasn't the coach having them there. They were playing on their own.
Yeah.
There's
As
still no
we
sub there's still no substitute for putting the time in and the hard
no,
work. It just
there
isn't.
there's not, and I guess is we prepare for final thought. The question I had down: is this a major problem or just a popular topic? Uh, Major, I don't know how you feel about that word or whatever. It's certainly an issue that needs addressed and constantly needs to be viewed and looked at. Um, Popular topic. Yeah, I don't know how. I'll let you answer that however you want. But I guess what I would say is either way, how are we going to fix it or how are we going to continue to adapt to it? I guess I would say that there's enough going on and there's enough opportunities for people to be involved in, and it's all scrunched inside about a 3 to 4 week period here in June, that it's certainly a popular topic, and it's probably at least an issue that constantly needs to be evaluated and addressed. But I think there's a lot of players involved in it. There's the athlete, there's the parent, there's the coach, there's the administration, and then there's even the state level. And I think a lot of times in leadership, I guess I'll throw this out there to start our final thought, and I'll give you the last shot at it. Is I don't think it hurts for leadership to provide an intelligent, well thought out, well researched plan of action. So like I don't have a problem with what Kentucky has done. Yeah, I mean if they feel like they've gathered all this information, and a lot of times change will throw people off. But if you think about it, Matt, as a basketball coach over the years, we don't think anything of August, right? We just know that that's
Right.
what it is now. If 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 it's a week, if it's 2 weeks, if it's the state putting it out, if it's the school putting out or whatever. But I think what we've established in the show at that point, I do think that there has to be an understanding of parents and athletes that how you choose to use that dead period is up to you, but also understand that when you're not in those dead periods, the chaos is going to be the same, right? And even more so probably because people are going to be looking to scrunch things in more and more and more. Because what makes June unique is you're not in school. What makes July unique is you're not in school. A lot of people might say, like as a baseball coach of 30 years now, a lot more of our off season is probably the fall and winter, if I'm being honest, right? I try to
Hmm.
step away from kids and so forth. We just finished up our season. I try to give them 30 days or so, or 60 days, and a lot of them will go play summer ball or whatever. But we're probably more fall winter. But what's unique about that is we're in school. Most of them are playing a fall sport. Most of them are playing a winter sport. And the schedule doesn't have the same opportunity. They're in school. We're all teaching. We're all working. We're all doing these things. So I do think there has to be an awareness of how it's going to scrunch the chaos into a smaller window, even more so. And then how they use that time off is really going to be on them. I think it has to be a partnership. You can have leadership establish something, but I loved your school analogy you used earlier. There has to be a connection of all adults involved if we're really going to make leadway in what we think the true issue is. Because is the true issue that the kids need more time, parents need more time, families need more time? I'd say there's all some truth to that.
Hmm.
Coaches need more time. Goodness, think about how many
Yeah.
hours coaches are away from their families. I'm sure some coaches would welcome, yeah, I would love just a 2 week period to breathe, or a week,
Hmm.
1 week, to breathe. So I guess that's where I'm at there in terms of, I think it's an important enough topic that it needs discussed. I do think June is forever changing, and we're going to have to adapt a little bit as school changes, as our spring sports change and moves back a little bit. We are going to have to take a look at how we're operating June and July. I'll go ahead and give you the final thought, Matt. I've really enjoyed the show.
Yeah, I like the words you use there, Shane, partnership, because I do think for this to work, it's like anything else, the best laid plans, right? Sometimes don't, but the partnership, there would have to be a cooperation there to make this work perfectly or as close to perfectly as it can. Like for instance, because I can tell you right now, if we approach this at our school, um, one of the things, one of the feedback I would get from coaches, I'm sure would be okay. Well, we're going to take this week off, right? And then some parents are still going to schedule their vacation on another week, and then so now I'm going to have basically 2 weeks without my top two players at my workouts, because the parent didn't take the time to look and say, oh, well, this is the off week. Let's schedule vacation here. They schedule it another week. You see what I'm saying? Like it's never
Mm-hmm.
going to be perfect. It's not
No.
like if you have this dead week that every single athlete and their parents will schedule everything they need to get it done in that
No.
week. So you're still
Mm-hmm.
going to have people. And so there does have to be some level of cooperation there and partnership, like you say. Um, I think ultimately, this comes down to leadership, and I think that as a school, um, I don't see the OHSA doing this. I could be dead wrong. They might be talking about it today, for all I know, but I don't I don't see this happening at a state level like super quick. So I think it's going to come down to a school level thing right now. And I think that's where leadership comes into play, and I think as a school, you have to decide what do we think, like you said, how major of a problem is this? And if it is, let's address it. I know that one of the comments on uh, your Facebook post, Shayne, that you put out was, well, I like the idea, but we couldn't do it unless everybody does it. Well, I mean, yeah, you could. You know what I mean? That's what leadership is. I mean, as a school, we can do what we think's best for our athletes. We don't have to. Like we talked about. Does it take pressure off us if everybody does it? Sure, but ultimately,
Yeah.
ultimately, it's our school.
if
It's
you
our
if you
kids.
believe in it, and you sell it to your parents and your athletes and your kids and so forth. And I
Yeah.
think logistics and planning are huge because even from a school perspective, I know like right now in the summer, maybe maintenance is having a heck of a time getting people. Well, you got to stay out of this hallway, get out of this hallway.
Yes.
You you already a lot of times will shut down a gym for 5 days because you're going to all of those logistics and all of those things
Mhm.
have to be planned, or you're going to end up having the counter things happen, and you're going to end up having a lot of people who should be together in this partnership kind of at one another and fighting one another.
I'm glad you said that because early in the show, Shayne, I had mentioned that it's not just the benefits, not just for athletes and parents. I'm glad you mentioned the facilities. A lot of these schools are using this time too to have their gym floor refinished, to get the waxing and all the hallways done, like you said. Even on their outdoor facilities, like we have Bermuda grass on football and soccer. There's some maintenance that has to be done to that at times. So we could possibly use these off weeks for some of that. There's there. I mean, if you
Don't
talk
you
to,
agree that it would be absolutely crucial?
yes.
I'm just saying if the school in question said we're going to take these 10 days off,
Hmm.
that you as an administration use those 10 days, because now all of a sudden if these 10 days are off, but you're like, hey, when we come back off of
Hmm.
this, the high school is going to be closed for 5 days because the gym's being redone. You know what I mean?
No,
Like, yeah,
right. You'd have to coordinate. And I think if you talk to most custodians or maintenance folks, and you told them, hey, there's going to be a 7 to 10 day period where it's going to be a ghost town in here, they'd probably be like, heck yeah. I mean,
yeah,
we can get
yeah,
a lot done. But like you said, you would have to coordinate
yeah.
and so, yeah, I think there's some real merit to this. I think there's some value to discussing it. I think honestly, like I told you earlier in the show, I didn't know there are already some schools doing this, so I see this probably becoming a thing. More and more schools will probably do something like this over time, so it's going to be interesting to see where it goes.
Well, I really enjoyed it. Again, show 72 as we kick off our season number 7. Again, I want to thank Dr. Chris Good with Good Health Chiropractic Center for all the support. Check us out on YouTube. Get us wherever you get your podcast app. Again, on YouTube, there it's the SVC Sports Zone channel. The podcast here is Expanding the Zone. We think we have some great coverage coming up for you here in season 7. Join us next week here as episode 73, Matt. We're going to be talking about making the most important thing the most important thing. And we may or may not always agree on what the most important thing is. And maybe that's why we don't make the most important thing the most important thing. So if that confuses you, then make sure you tune into 73 so that we can try
I
to
don't
make
know
some
how it
sense
could.
of it. So again, hey, thanks everyone. Enjoyed it, Matt, and we'll come back at you next week on episode 73. Thank you.